You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seatbelts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring Reptar and Thursty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabalcast. And this week, we're kind of bundling some episodes we've already done prior. It's basically the Q1 event review. I've been to a few events, multiple regions. Basically, going to take a look back at all of them now that we're through them. Take it away.
Yep. So prior to this, like you mentioned, we talked about specific events and how they felt and things like that. But with the quarter done, we thought, why not take a look back at these? Because this is one of the first times where people are actually making the choice to go to one style of event or another if they are TCG vendors. So the first question I have is, what locations have you been to in Q1 of 2025?
So Q1 has been Chicago, LA, Miami, Atlanta, and the end of May I'll have Orlando. Now for the rest of the year, some of the cities will be revisited twice. There's 2 events in Orlando, 2 in Chicago, and 2 in, I think, Edinburgh, New Jersey.
Okay, Edison, yeah.
Edison, New Jersey. My apology to all the New Jersey listeners. So that's looking forward. But looking back, it's been literally both coasts, the Midwest, the Southeast that isn't quite coastal and pulls a little bit more from the DMV area. But yeah.
Yep, okay. And for those that don't know, DMV isn't just the acronym for your Department of Motor Vehicles. That is a very specific area in Maryland.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we look at these locations that you've been to, can you kind of bracket those locations and events into different regions? And this is kind of understanding that literal location creates regionality, but even between, say, Atlanta and Miami, things are completely different between those two cities.
Yeah, and that's actually kind of, you have your East Coast and West Coast is, your general umbrella, but then you also have Northern East Coast and Southern East Coast. But for these, I'd say East Coast. Atlanta is a Southeast. It's a different region for the exact reasons, look, regionality, even that close to one another, does have a huge difference on it. Chicago is just flyover country. I understand Chicago is a real city in the Midwest, but it's still flyover. And then you have the West Coast where in my experience, any event on the West Coast is fairly similar. Just doesn't really have as much variety as East Coast does. But that's basically, I'd say, East Coast, Southeast, Flyover, and West Coast would be how I'd classify them. Okay,
I'm curious to know, by the time we get to Collecticon, the one in Edison, which is in July, So for those of us that live on the East Coast of the United States, we're basically divided into 3 regions. We have New England, which stretches from Maine down to about Connecticut. Then we have Mid-Atlantic, which covers New York City, New York State, all the way down to like the Carolinas. And then you have the literal NCAA style SEC, the Southeast, which contains Georgia, Florida, and at least South Carolina. And I'm wondering if the Edison event is going to feel different than Atlanta and Orlando, or if it will feel similar to Atlanta and Miami, because Edison isn't too far from Newark International, LaGuardia, JFK. So those are big fly-intos. Then not too far south from there, about 60 to 90 minutes away, you have BWI in Baltimore. You have Dulles and Reagan in DC. So you have very accessible locations from there. I would not expect Logan to pull. That's about a 5-hour drive. But because of how many international flights you can have into that area, to me, it seems like that would be very similar to Atlanta, which is one of, if not the busiest airport inside the United States, and possibly Miami, which is also another very popular route. So hopefully we can review this in the future and kind of figure that out. But I'm wondering, there might not be a regionality the way I phrased the question of hey, can you bucket these places? And it may be more like, okay, you have your flyover cities like Chicago,
Yeah.
Kansas City and some of the ones in Texas, no offense. And then you have your coastal cities, and even in your coastals, they feel different because you have like SeaTac and LA, which could see a huge pull of Asian influence.
Yep.
But then you have like San Diego and San Jose, which may pull up from LatAm instead. And we could kind of start bucketing regionality based on that. So this might be an interesting earmark for later. But if you haven't really seen a whole lot of that now, it does kind of make sense because, as you mentioned, it's like, what, 4 events thus far this year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing I'm actually really interested to see is, as the year goes, the cities that have multiple events, do they feel different? And if so, how?
Yeah.
Just based on the overall global financial landscape. Interested to see how that does.
Yeah, of course, that'll play into it. And then similarly at the same time, when we're looking at the global financial, and we've got to see what the dollar is powerful against now versus into the future. And then, yes, if the dollar does lose power against something like the euro, we could see people fly into the U.S. and kind of move into or move out of product as an arbitrage effort. The same thing with the West Coast.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So we didn't really have a great regionality breakdown like I thought we might, but each event is going to have its own feel. We spent a lot of time talking about Atlanta and how that's kind of a money city and a sports city. So you mentioned Chicago and Orlando. And I imagine just looking at the 3 of those, they are wildly divergent from one another.
Very much so. And this is something I learned on the sports side, is that Chicago is just a collector city. Whatever the number is, if they want the card, they'll just pay it. And that was still true. And it was really interesting because Atlanta, you still had some like East Coast wealth coming in there, but most of the clientele was like people flipping TCGs themselves. Like it was people trying to, get a Poncho Pikachu set or something like that. And then Miami was very much what you would expect from Miami. There were a bunch of tourists that happened to be there that came by. There were people that had grown up there, but it was a little bit more of a local and within 6-hour pull. Which is kind of what I expected. Whereas Atlanta pulled from, I think there was someone from Maryland that was there, as far west as like Ohio and Indiana. So it had like a decent pull. And the thing that I noticed at all of them that was similar, regardless of what the customer profile was, everyone planned for this. This was a conscious effort on their part to hey, I'm going to take time to make sure that I go to this thing, even the people that were local. And there were more of them than I can remember in probably a decade that said, this is my first event ever. And that was a very interesting thing to see, regardless of where it was. Because, I would expect a place like Chicago, probably most of those people have been to events like this before.
Yeah.
No. LA, no, hadn't been to those events and lived in the area.
Yeah.
So that was a really interesting thing to see as well with these.
So when it comes to Collecticons, to get into the door as an attendee, is there a badge? Or is it just kind of
There is a badge.
Okay.
So there's a badge you can purchase online, and you can purchase them on site for a little bit more. But the thing that I really like that they do is they put up like basically photo backdrops as though you're on a red carpet. So people can like take photos there or whatever, which is just a neat thing to do. Cons, so.
Okay. So yeah, when you said people plan for this, it made me feel like immediately there were tickets to get in or badges to get in, as opposed to Grand Prix, which you and I have talked about, which is just like your Friday's not going to be great. Yeah, exactly. Because that's when people work, but you might get like the 5 p.m. bump from people that are out of work. And now it's like, hey, let's go to the Grand Prix and just sell some shit kind of things.
Exactly.
Yeah. And since I haven't been to a Collecticon, we've never really touched on that. I felt like I'd ask because as you described it, it made it feel that way. If you're planning for an event like this, you're not just going to plan to go to the city and then, if I have time, I'll go to Collecticon. No, there's a badge involved. I have to buy a badge. I have to plan my trip around this kind of thing. To pull back the curtain, I'm going to RC Minneapolis. By the time this episode comes out, I'll have been back. But I won't pay to get into that room. I'll pay to play in
Yeah.
all the events, but I'll just walk in for free. If I decided to spend my entire 4 days in Minneapolis at the Mall of America instead of the RC, then that's on me, and I would have had spent
Yeah.
no money to get into either location. I really don't have to plan to go to these events because I have to buy a badge. I plan to go to the city, and then I have to plan, if I want to go to the RC, what I'm going to do there. And those are two completely different ideas. When you have to pay for the badge, you got to figure out what you're going to do once you're inside. You don't just want to make it, you want to make it worth your while. You don't want it to be worth nothing, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you are looking at specific events, we're going to Miami, Orlando, Chicago. You have those events in front of you. And we talked about this, I think, a little bit with LA and a little bit with Miami. Were you trying to figure out if these events would be a buy event or a sell event based on previous knowledge of those cities for Magic events, YCSs, etc., that you have vended, or saying like, no, we know when we go to the Southeast, to Texas, we're there to sell, kind of things.
Yeah.
Or when we go to the West Coast, we're going to bring like the Gonzo Pokemon stuff. We're going to sell, and then we're going to buy raw unslapped to then slap kind of stuff. Like, did you have those kind of plans going into each of these events, or were some of these just like, let's feel out what a Collecticon is like here?
So most of the expectations were based on prior experience.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have learned through the process, regardless of region, that I think was very illuminating, because it was not always the case. The island is infinitely more worth it than just a half booth, because it's the only way people expect to come and sit down to sell cards, because they're so used to vendors using as much space as they can to monetize. And that was very interesting, because those were infinitely better buy shows, regardless of where they were. Like Chicago was an insane buy show, and Chicago is not a city where you buy typically. We went into that expecting to sell a lot, because Chicago is a city where you sell. It's a collector city. And we spent almost as much as we sold, which was not what we expected. The really interesting thing, though, was that in Miami, we had brought some higher-end product thinking, as you said, it's just like a show in Texas. When you go to Dallas, someone can literally walk into the room with $500,000 cash like it's nothing. We expected Miami, based on previous experience, to be the case, or be similar to that, but we sold infinitely more of the 100 and under stuff. So that is one that we're actually expecting to be a little bit more true going forward.
Okay.
Is that based on just the way this bubble in Pokemon is going right now? It's not going to keep up forever. It feels like COVID again, and we all saw what happened. Prices cratered for a little bit, and then we hit another bubble. But that's the thing that I did learn, is that it's seeming like some of the old pre-COVID notions of what an event in a city was like have changed drastically.
Got it. So did that also impact the stock that you brought? So if you go to Chicago and you see okay, hey, this is actually not acting the way we thought it would that impact the next show? I don't remember the order you did things in. It was like Chicago, LA, Miami, or something like that?
LA, Miami, Chicago.
Okay. Yeah, so you go out to LA and you're like, okay, this is actually a really good sell show. Did that change how you saw it? Atlanta, and so you slanted your inventory differently, or you were like, hey, Atlanta for Magic, for Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, etc., has always been this kind of city. We know where we're going to sell here, we'll bring that. Same for Chicago, etc., etc. So the question here is kind of, did the previous show and any changes there impact the next show?
Yeah, which has actually been a really fun process, because anyone who was long-term doing events pre-COVID, it was just a kit. Everyone had the same kit. You did it the exact same way. It didn't matter.
Yep.
And now having to learn this stuff on the fly has been kind of fun. But yeah, it definitely influenced it, especially when it comes to arbitrage markets. That was very interesting. But we basically started paring back on the like WotC era high end, sticking mostly to like Zards, Pikachu, like some of the more iconic
The big
Pokemon.
three, and then some Chonkachus and what have you. Yeah, right.
Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah. And, ramped up a little bit more on the modern because it's, frankly, nobody wants to be left holding that bag.
Mhm.
They're not making more Zards, but they can always make more of whatever Moonbreon art they want.
Yeah, whatever
So yeah,
Pidgeot is running standard, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
yeah. So that has actually started to change things, and it's been interesting to kind of see it from like fresh eyes of, man, yes, it's all the same and I've done it all before, but this is kind of interesting to see play out this way this time. So
Okay, so you did mention arbitrage, and I feel like you did that purposely to dovetail into the next question, which is just this is kind of more of a hindsight question. And for next year, or as you traipse back across the country, are there arbitrage opportunities with each one of these markets that you saw?
yes, which dovetails back to one of my previous answers as well about people planning for this. So we noticed significantly more British, English vendors coming on the East Coast,
Oh, interesting.
and significantly more, I guess, Asian vendors
APAC
coming
region
in
vendors
on
and
the West Coast. Yeah, all the APAC vendors. So seeing that back was fascinating. Because I think it was LA was the first one I did, and I was like, oh, I want to see if this continues. No, that's actually continued. So there have been people coming over, and it's been really interesting because not only is it, oh, we know where we can arbitrage, Card Market is now covering everything. So we can literally go see what we should bring because we can get the information everyone else is using for their buys.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the old GP, like pre-event hot listing when all the vendors would circulate their hot list to each other. And it was just like, all right, let's take these out of the case. They're going to this vendor. These are to this vendor, like anything like that.
Okay.
It feels like that again. And so now when we're going East Coast, we take a look at Card Market and see, okay, where do we have the biggest gap here that we can guarantee we've auto sold these before we even show up.
Yeah.
And that's been awesome.
No, for sure. And that's kind of what I was curious about when we talked about regionality earlier. And then I guess what we'll see in the future once you make it to Edison is just, are you going to have international vendors, specifically European, when we're looking at the East Coast, pop into some or all of these events? And what can you do with that information in front of you? Can you slant your cases? Can you slant your buys and sells to other vendors? Yeah. Can you start building that vendor rapport where, if you guys are going to Edison, Atlanta, Miami, these places that are easy to get to from the UK and the EU, do you just sync up ahead of time and just be like, all right, look, what are you looking for? This is what I'm looking for. And then you just swapsy at the event, which is super cool. You don't have to necessarily worry about arbitraging product from the locals on the West Coast to the vendors coming in on the East Coast. You can actually just be the intermediary, literally, in North America and move things from one coast to the other, from vendor to vendor, which is an opportunity we didn't quite have in Magic, not because we didn't have these events, but because the vendors would also cross country.
Yeah.
MTG...
Because they would take like 3 months to travel with event.
Exactly. So you get MTG Mint Card and MTG Lion and all these APAC vendors out on the East Coast. And similarly, you'd get like Galactus and 3-for-1 out on the West Coast, and they were doing it themselves. They weren't just coming in for their coastals and then going back. So that creates a unique opportunity for you. This next one is more of a kind of like a vibes check. So we're going to look back at GPs, and we're going to look at YCSs. I think that's Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series. And I don't know what Pokemon used to call them, so we'll just kind of lump it in there. So when you look at those older style large events for these games, how do collecticons feel in comparison as a vendor? And I do understand up top, obviously people aren't there to play to win something. There are just randoms walking in to sell stuff, but you would have that at all these events too. And that's the core of this question, the crux of it. Comparatively speaking, how did these events feel? How did Collecticons feel to these older style events for the big three games?
So it feels like the big events for those games 15 to 25 years ago, when everyone who played the game was in love with it. They were there to have fun. Yeah, we wanted to win, but also like the grinder circuit knew every run. Like we all knew each other. So, oh, it's you again, whatever, how are you doing? How's school going? Whatever. There was like that camaraderie there. It felt that is what it feels most like in regards to those events is like, man, my nostalgia vision is kicking off to when like Cocoa Pebbles won a pro tour. That time was awesome, and that's what Collecticon feels like. It feels like loving the hobby again.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
Yeah, people are there to have fun. They're just engaging. They're enjoying themselves. They're enjoying the games that they are there to engage with. It feels like a lot of redundant things to say, but at the end of the day, I guess that's kind of what it is. Now, moving up to the modern era, compared to Star City games, Spotlights, I don't know what they call them, SCG cons, that's what it is. Yeah. They have this multi-game structure. And I don't think you've been to one in 2025. I've been the one going in as an attendee.
No. Yeah, I've been in 24, but not this year, yeah.
But based on what you've seen and heard in the past, how do Collecticons, at least in 2025, feel in comparison to something like a Star City SCG Con, where it's just like, hey, we have a bunch of games at the Star City. Come out and play a bunch of these games at the Star City. The vendors here will be vending a lot of these games at the Star City. Versus Collecticon, which is just like, we got a lot of shit. Come on down.
Yeah. It is, the marketing does feel similar because both of them are, hey, we have all this stuff. Granted, Star City puts an emphasis on games, and Collecticon is just like, when you're like what kind of stuff? They just say stuff. What do you want? It feels, as a vendor, it feels better. At least from all of my friends and people I know that have vended Star Cities this year.
Yeah.
As a vendor, it feels better at Collecticon. I think, however, Star City is doing the broad appeal thing correct. I do think you need to cast a wide net, and I think in that regard, it does feel a little bit like a Collecticon. But generally, I would say of the two, it does feel more like the older style and bears less of a resemblance vibes-wise to an SCG, and more like formatting-wise. It does resemble an SCG.
Okay, that makes sense, because the vibes at an SCG is just mainly, we're here to play our games and take back whatever prize we do or don't win. We're not really here to engage with the vendors. They're just kind of an afterthought. Or, hey, we forgot to bring these cards, / I locked in my deck list at 3 a.m. and now I need some shit. Please help. Yep. Like we've talked about before. In the PTQ season, right? And because Collecticon seems to be more about celebration of the games themselves, more so as the sum of their whole rather than something to engage with competitively, it felt like the vibes would be completely different. And I would assume, as I haven't been to a MagicCon yet, a PT basically, that outside of that competitive area, the vibes at a PT should align with those at a Collecticon, which is just, hey, we're here just to enjoy the games that we play. And that's it. We're here to engage with the vendors. We're here to buy some shit, sell some shit, and get out.
And that's what Vegas felt like last year.
Yeah.
Was, not the Pro Tour area, because the Pro Tour area was deathly silent during matches.
Yeah.
It was wild, but yeah.
All right. And then the last question that I have is, looking back on all of Q1 of 2025, do you think these events are good enough to keep you excited for the rest of the year and into 2026?
I think so. And this is the thing that's really telling of that to me, is that I have actually considered attending, like just going to events as an attendee for the first time in over a decade. Where I'm like, man, maybe I don't want to vend this event coming up. Maybe I just want to go.
Yeah.
And I literally, I know it's been more than a decade, but I can't remember the last time I felt that. It's been a very long time. So that's how I know it guaranteed through this year and probably all of 2026 as well. I will be excited. Yeah.
Yeah, based on everything you said and from what I've seen, the one that's in my backyard up in Edison in July is definitely something, if I have the time, that I want to look into going to. Talking to a number of my locals, they're interested in going to them more to see like if they can pick up the last couple of cards they're looking for, because everybody down here vends at basically like SCG prices, which is well over TCG, and they'd rather support a store they know than some random. And then also Collecticon has so much more on top of what they're looking for that like, hey, cool spectacle, let's see what's up.
Yeah.
So it's exciting to see that. And we talked about earlier, if 2025 shakes out that Collecticons are good enough to stick with, you'll be solicited for 2026 and you have to buy into the entire year, correct?
So no. What they did, you had the option to buy into the entire year, and you got a sharp discount.
Oh, okay.
But they also gave you the option before sales were live for those events to get tables. So you could even cherry pick like the 3 events you wanted to do and get tables if you vended it the previous year. So that was actually very interesting. I misunderstood how it was explained to me, but yeah, it was, hey, here's the whole year. Here's the price if you commit to every single show, and here's the price per show.
Okay.
So.
No, that's interesting, because like there are some anime cons that I've worked where if you've vended X number of previous years, you get obviously into the pool of tables at a certain time with the vendors in your bracket, basically. And if you wanted to miss a year, take a gap year, you could. And you would come back at about the same spot.
Yeah, and that's how the National is and Gen Con is now.
Yeah, okay.
But on the gaming side, I don't think anything's gotten as big as Gen Con besides Gen Con to need that kind of system.
Yeah. I'm mainly thinking of like Anime Expo at Anime Boston, like where Anime Expo sells out pretty quickly. And it's not that it's difficult for people to get into. There's, generally speaking, enough churn to move in and out, but they do understand that LA, literally for July 4th weekend, can be very difficult for people, and with enough lead time, they can give you some leeway on it. If you've been there long enough, they'll work with you. And so I figured some others were the same, like maybe SDCC or NYCC, etc. at the top end. I think PAX is kind of a first come, first serve. Then you have Gen Con, like you mentioned, which means Origins, Gamma, etc. might also kind of fall suit, because they all seem to be kind of industry standard for this. The one thing that I like about Collecticon versus the old GP series is that there were certain TOs for GPs that if you didn't buy their entire event series, you wouldn't get a table at a single one. And notably, that mattered with the West Coast. So if you didn't get the like Salt Lake City, Utah table, you wouldn't get the LA or Oakland table either. You had to go to Salt Lake to get the rest of the events as well. You couldn't cherry pick.
Yeah.
Which seems really powerful for Collecticon to that also lets some kind of new vendors circle through as well, which is kind of
and that's what I expect they'll go to, just based on like talking to the people that run it and everything. They actually like they know what they're doing. They know how to run events. They know how they want to scale. I fully expect them to adopt that one within the next 2 to 3 years, where it's like, hey, if you actually want to lock it in, you have to lock the whole year in. Otherwise, we do let those new vendors in. We do let them into the circuit now. And that's like your choice. Either you're big enough to do it or you're not. And that's how we're going to do it. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do convert to that, is what I'm saying.
Okay, that does make sense. Like if it gets more popular, etc.
Yeah.
Okay. I really don't have any more questions about Q1. I'm sure the more the year goes on, the more you retread some of these locations, the more some of what we talked about now might become more pronounced, and there might be some more insights that we can pick up on for sure. So this is definitely something I would like to catch back up on as we go throughout the year, especially as this is, insofar as I know, outside of just like an anime convention or like a local con, like we have Kineticon, things like
Yeah.
that up in New England. The only major event in regions that people can go to buy, sell, trade, just anything really.
Yeah.
So I'll be curious to see how this shakes out. Is there anything else from Q1 2025 that you noticed that we didn't talk about that you'd like to bring up before we move on to picks?
Not really. Again, the thing that I'm most looking forward to is seeing how that regionality plays out, not just as the year goes on, but as, cities are revisited, how things change. That's definitely looking forward to that, and really interested to see how I am not vending them, but I have friends that are. There's actually not just Dallas. There's like San Antonio is getting a Collecticon, and they haven't had events in a long time.
Yeah.
So they're actually touching on those cities. I am curious to see how those do the rest of the year as well. And I did also want to touch on, from what I have heard, Edison is literally everything you expect it to be. It is just mass arbitrage just coming in from all over, or people planning trips around it from overseas. That I expect Edison to be insane, but we'll see when it happens.
For those that don't know, Edison, New Jersey is much further south from Newark International than where GP New York is generally held. It's down the Parkway and a mount. Generally speaking, it'll be in like the tech park area. There will be a lot to do there. And in the heydays of Magic, there were actually Grand Prix held there. There have been a number of old school Magic events held there in the last few years. I think the ironically named Mobster Con has been held there a couple times. And people like Finkel have come in from New York City to go play these. BDM, Mike Flores, etc., do come into these events because Edison is easy to get to. It's on a major train line. It is, like I said, not too far from Newark International, which means LaGuardia, JFK, it's a little bit more of a hike. Then you have a BWI and the number of airports around DC that can all filter in. So that does not surprise me that this could be a very large event, especially one for arbitrage from NA to EU, etc. Economics aside, if Edison continues to be one of the northernmost events on the East Coast, then I would expect it to continue that trend. The moment you bring in New York City or Boston, you start to fight Edison in that regard, and you could shed one for the other. But those cities are also very expensive. So there's that.
Very true.
You have to consider that as well. All right. So picks?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. So as discussed on the back end, I'm going to go first because what you're talking about today is just above and beyond interesting to me. And I want to leave people with something fun to think about. So today, instead, I'm going to talk about something boring, and I am going to talk about the card Windfall. Now, for those that don't know, Windfall is a sorcery that costs 2 and a blue, and it says each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. And when you hear that language, you're like, oh, cool, a card that was printed in Commander for Commander. And you would be wrong. This is the card printed in Urga Saga for Standard. That was eventually banned in Standard and Extended and all over the place.
Yeah.
And so we are
so good.
It is incredibly good. And so we are actually looking at the Lost Caverns of Ixalan printing for Windfall because they continue to put it in Commander decks. It's a very good card there. The reason we're honing in on LCC is because this came out, the numbers on it moved in such a way that I thought hey, now's the time to start monitoring this card, and that's it. It was reprinted again in Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and you kind of get this idea that every now and again they just like to throw it into Commander set. So a lot of the numbers I'm going to be giving you today are based solely on the LCC version, though the Outlaws version does actually parallel a lot of this. So as of literally this morning when I took my notes, CK was buying 88 copies at $1.35, and they had 20 in stock, retailing for $4.50. Recording this episode later today, they are buying 95 copies for $1.80. Both of these numbers have increased, and now you can see why we're talking about Windfall today. On TCG Player, when I took my notes, there were 66 listings for a market price of $3.84. And we are now at 72 listings with a market price of $4.41. So we are seeing upward trajectory on Windfall as a card. Fantastic. I added this to my list in December of 2023. CK was buying 185 at 90 cents because it was just reprinted. They had 5 for sale from LCC for $1.80. And there are 29 listings on TCG Player at $2.29 because not a lot of people were listing Windfall from the LCC Commander decks on TCG Player. That's it. I basically zero-dayed this card into my notes. When we look at Commander on the whole and what it's doing in the format, basically we're looking at drawing cards for both fun and profit, but sometimes pain, which can also be fun. And honestly, we're not here to kink shame. You do what you do.
No,
right?
Never. Yeah.
So when we take a look at Rec, and I'll bring this up pretty quickly, we see immediately various levels of what I like to call pain for profit as a theme when viewing commanders like Nekasar and Niv-Mizzet Parun. And that is Niv-Mizzet Parun is the triple blue, triple red version of Niv-Mizzet that says whenever you draw a card, Niv-Mizzet Parun deals 1 damage to any target. So you're basically just spraying damage across the table, and the more cards you draw, the more damage you can deal, and thus you look to end the game that way. So both Nekasar and Niv-Mizzet and a handful of other commanders do want to maximize what we call wheel and wheel-esque effects to churn through their library and chain mass draw effects to win the game. So basically, wheel is shorthand for Wheel of Fortune. Discard your hand, draw 7, right? We want to be basically trying to draw as close to 7 or more as possible. So wheel, time twister, windfall, winds of change, etc. These are all wheel effects, and they all go in these 2 decks. Now, there are other commanders like the Locust God, Quasar, Augur of Agonies, and Captain Howler, Sea Scourge, that just want to either draw or discard a bunch of cards for similar, though still powerful, effects that can end a game pretty quickly. These just kind of take more steps to get there, and it's often not a straightforward path. It can be a bit winding. So, for instance, with the Locust God, it does appear that you just want to enter combat and serve with your insects. But oftentimes, you won't even be able to connect with your insects because of cards like Aetherize, Echoing Truth, and Cyclonic Rift just floating around the format. So instead, using something like Impact Tremors or Perforos God of the Forge can get you there instead. And while that path isn't too winding, it does take more time and effort, and thus can lean a bit more casual. Then below that, we have a bunch of like blue soup commanders, some that just want to stay flush with cards, and other decks that extend their scope to the graveyard, like Muldrotha. So we see Windfall is just a piece of a pretty large puzzle, and these kind of play pretty casually. All in all, this makes Windfall a card sought by both casual and competitive commander players alike. When it comes to the timeline on this, there were 383 individual listings when I took my notes. On page 1 of TCG Player, there was one vendor with 127 Nearman copies at $3.60 plus $2 shipping, so that makes it a $5.50 card. And there were a lot of other vendors on page 1 with quantities 12 to 50, right? So we have a lot of anchors on page 1. And then on page 2, we had a singular vendor with 24 Nearman copies at $4.97 with, quote, free shipping over $50, unquote, which basically means somewhere between $3 and $5 shipping, which makes that an $8 to $10 card raw. So that's basically what we're seeing. We're finally seeing the market price really adjust to cost plus shipping. 383 copies. Now this does sell about 15 Nearman copies a day, with minimal LP copies sold, as most copies left are near mint. Thus, we'll actually sell through this in about 25 days. So 383, div 15, approximately 25. And if we buy the cheap bricks, we can almost 1.5x by the end of the month. This would be the end of May. We just have to buy in bulk. Buying individually will not allow us to arbitrage these. You have to buy in bulk from these vendors that have 50, 40, whatever. That's where you're really going to be able to sink in. Buy lists, however, look like they are severely lagging behind, so I wouldn't even consider them as an out in the short term. So again, while the price on CK did go up, it went up from $1.30 something to $1.80. Woohoo. Meanwhile, this is almost an $8 card on TCG Player. We can't look at buy lists. We have to cycle back into TCG Player. And luckily, at the end of May, we'll be able to be selling for profit. Reprint equity on Windfall. This does seem to catch a reprint every 18 to 24 months or so, either in a sealed Commander product or in a Commander deck. So I would expect the next reprint before the end of the year. Thus, we want to get in and get out while we have the time. If we miss that, though, demand should overtake supply within 6 months to a year of the reprint. So if you don't move fast enough, if you're too late, you buy in, then a reprint happens, you're going to have to wait another 6 months to a year. That isn't terrible. You're not sinking a lot of money into this. That's the cycle, 6 to 12 months. But that's your window, knowing this gets a reprint about every year and a half to 2 years. Be careful. When it comes to buy quantity, me personally, between playing these in Constructed and buying sealed Commander decks, I have close to a dozen Windfalls, and that's about where I'm happy. If I had the opportunity to move these to locals, I'd double down, as this isn't a card that exists in most binders, so the flip is easy, but I don't actually have a local player base to serve. They're very in tune with Windfall. My C EDH players, my big C Commander players, they're all very in tune with Windfall, so I just don't have an audience. So I'm happy sitting on the numbers I have. I'm not going to be buying into this. If you want to churn these in under 30 days, by all means, go for it and buy as many as you can. I think this card is just gold right now.
Yeah. I still think that this is one of those cards that at any moment, back when Hull Breacher was a thing, can just take over a meta like that as well, which if Wizards has proved anything, it's that they like printing effects like that. So I expect that if that happens, this card will also see a bump in big C and little C Commander. And I think that this card is just something that you should always be sitting on, like 3 playsets of that 10 to 15 range.
Yeah.
I've got, because I'm a degenerate, about 30 of the Starfoil promo still. I'm still holding them because I still, much like you, believe in the card Windfall in general. It's just a great one to have, and I think in my mind, this was still a $3 to $5 card. $5 at an event, $3 on TCG. So I didn't even realize how quickly the price had gone up quickly on the card, but thank you for the call out.
Yeah. No problem at all. Windfall is fun and interesting to do.
Yeah. Everybody loves windfalling.
Now, for your end of things, which is super interesting.
So, I am calling out probably the most ridiculous thing I've ever called out on the show, which I don't know how many times Sarkhan's Unsealing is at now, but that's saying something. And it's sleeves and current in-print standard sealed products. So a couple of weeks ago, when Terra started kicking off, there were some emails circulated from distributors, GTS, Southern, Alliance, everyone, basically saying, hey, Upper Deck just told us go fuck yourselves, or Ultra Pro, sorry, said go fuck yourselves, you're paying 57% more for everything across the board. And that was obviously passed on to us as an LGS, which then will naturally get passed on to the end consumer, as in you coming into the store and shopping. Now, most sleeve supplies, we all know, are manufactured overseas. One of the interesting things, and this is why I said current, in-print product, is there's a lot of logistical issues going on with printing right now. Obviously, if cards are printed in China, they're going to go up in price. There's not a lot of printing capacity in the States. Depending where they are in Europe, they may go up in price. And for the time being, Cardamundi is still owned by Fanatics, who has a very pressing need to print cards. So if there is a product that's going to be cut, I would expect it to be something like Magic, so that fanatics can use the primary printer for themselves. And that plays into it as well. Now, the really interesting thing is that there are some distributors who have effectively told us, hey, look, you can restock for now at this price, but that's because it's our current stock. Like, we had it before this increase happened. Yeah, so like we're in on it for less. We're not gonna, fuck you out of whatever. You can pay the old price, but when they start coming in at a higher price, you're going to have to pay more. So it's kind of like an early call out to anyone that, hey, if you like to stock up on sleeves, top loaders, team bags, if you run a TCG store, hell, try to get them. I mean, as an example, Ultra Pro top loaders used to cost, I believe it was $64.90 for a case. Fanatics top loaders cost that much now. And those are like some of the worst top loaders you can get. So it's wild to see that that's playing out, and it's something that, unfortunately, based on the reality we're in, we just have to deal with and accept.
Yeah. And
since that message is already being passed on to me from, my representative, I at least wanted to say, hey guys, no, like very realistically, this is something we could see in the immediate future. And I mean, you said it before the episode, everyone remembers what happened with top loaders during COVID. It was awful. People were paying $2 for a used top loader. What? Like, that's how bad it was. And I'm not saying we're going to get there again, but we have had a similar situation recently where, supplies were fucked. And wanted to call it out a little bit ahead of time just to kind of get it out there that, hey, guys, pick up your case of Dragon Shields, your case of penny sleeves, top loaders, whatever. If there's standard sealed product that you may want to draft or may want to have a stockpile of, just to have like packs to open or something, or stockpile gifts, now would be the time before those prices start seeing that uptick.
Yep. Now, a couple of weeks ago, when we started talking about this behind the scenes, I was joking around that this is like the milk and bread memes. Like, you got to get your milk and bread. Get your milk and bread. Which is just like a guy from New England just going ham, just shitting on other like people from New England about what happens during a snowstorm, right? And because it just seemed like, yeah, duh, this happened once before, so we don't need to talk about it. And then, because I honestly didn't think that we would be in as prolonged a trade war as we are, and we're starting to hear and see that the boats coming in from overseas are half filled, and in a couple of weeks there just won't be any boats because companies don't know what the cost of goods is going to be by the time it hits the coast. They don't know what the tariff on them is going to be, so they're not going to send anything over. So there is very much the opportunity that, like, hey, supply on what is existent will be dwindling. It will end soon. Then we will have supply that will have been sent over in the half-filled boats, and then we will have no supply at all, and nobody really knows what's going on. We are very much in a tumultuous time right now when it comes to some of these things, specifically supplies from overseas that are made with PVC.
Yeah.
Right? And that's everything you've touched on. Top loaders, sleeves, the wrappings, like just PVCs.
Yeah.
When it comes to printing, things like that, that's stuff we talked about before when Fanatics took over some of these entities. We always thought that WotC would get
maybe
bumped.
This could be a thing.
Yeah, because sports cards are so much more powerful than Magic the Gathering that at some point WotC could just get pushed down the schedule. And now we might have a confluence of both. And so it is a very interesting call-out. And I won't lie, you told me sleeves and sealed of the current sets. And I thought you were like, man, this Dragon Art shit is selling. You can't get enough of it. And here we are, basically instead talking about the economy, not the fact that Sarkhan art is just doing gangbusters.
Really cool. Yeah. And the other interesting thing about this that I wanted to touch on is, so the tariffs were reversed, whatever, since then, and the price has not gone down.
Mm-hmm.
So I would expect that if this does happen, and it's like, hey, this is, just a result of the tariffs or whatever, it never goes back. Ever. I think it may be that all of a sudden now the barrier for entry is being increased, and
Okay.
that the companies will just say, "Hey, if we don't have to lower our prices back down, why would we?"
Hmm.
It's like I forget who it was. I think it was one of the EA CEOs was like, "Oh, we'd love to be in the world of $100 AAA," and the Take-Two president was like, "That sounds good." Well, of course, Grand Theft Auto could charge $100, and then all of a sudden every game's $100 because Grand Theft Auto did it.
Hmm.
So I would kind of expect something permanent like that to happen long term as well in the prices of these supplies.
Yeah.
Because if I'm Ultra Pro, like, why would I go back? If I can charge, if I can go from charging $249 to $349 a pack, that's an extra $40 every case I sell. Why am I not going to do that for free?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, and so that does resonate. It does ring true, and we're definitely in a spot now where we can arm people with knowledge about like, hey, is happening again. Get ahead of it,
yep,
because it could happen in the future again. So
yeah,
please be wary. Please be informed. Please protect yourselves.
yeah. You are your own best representative in this greater economy.
Yep.
Please.
All right.
Yeah.
So, anything else for this week?
Nope.
All right. So for at MTG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, YouTube, and Blue Sky, I am at Halt. I am Reptar. You are.
At Damon _Thurston.
We'll see you next week.